We are joined by our senior advisor and counsel for the ACLJ, former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. Secretary Pompeo, I wanted to go to you first because your counterpart of yours, Secretary Blinken, was in Israel today with Prime Minister Netanyahu and President Herzog. And we saw yesterday a Hamas leader go on a Lebanese TV channel justifying October 7th, saying that, by the way, there will be October 7th every day, and they will continue to happen over and over and over again. Are you concerned at all yet about the administration pushing for Israel to back off on the mission to eradicate Hamas? I mean, there's certainly, you hear more and more calls for ceasefires from other countries. That word keeps coming up. It's even come up from Hezbollah's leader. But so far, the U.S. has called for cessations so they could get out hostages, but they haven't called for that ceasefire, though it seems like world pressure on them is going to be pretty high.
Jordan, I think that's very true. I listened to Secretary Blinken this morning. He clearly is very moved by the pictures that he has seen. That much is clear. But his statement was kind of all over the lot. They express support for Israel and its need to wipe Hamas off the face of the earth, but at the same time are putting enormous restrictions on them, or at least seeking to put enormous restrictions on them. And I think you're right. More to follow there. Nearly every other nation has called for a ceasefire. You have Senator Durbin calling for a ceasefire in exchange for getting the hostages home. Right? That's the kind of appeasement that begets precisely what we saw on October 7th. I hope that Prime Minister Netanyahu will feel the freedom to do the necessary in spite of pressure coming from the United States. He already has a one-front war fighting Hamas. He doesn't need a second front being battled out in Washington, D.C. and in the salons of Europe. He needs the unmitigated support of the world to do what the world needs, which is to have Hamas eliminated. It's not just a benefit to the people of Israel. It's a benefit for the people of Gaza. It's a benefit for the people of the region. And it's certainly good for the United States as well.
It's interesting that's what's developing right now, Mike, is that Hassan Nasrallah, the head of Hamas, is kind of, and this isn't shocking, is speaking out of both sides of his mouth. He is not saying, and he's making the statement that, hey, this was Hamas acting on their own. There was no coordination with Hezbollah on this. Don't blame us, basically, for these atrocities. On the other hand, we know that Hamas and Hezbollah have both been in Iran and most recently in Moscow. What's your take on that aspect of it?
Yeah, look, Nasrallah is doing what Nasrallah does, right? He's a terrorist. He's lying. He's telling a story that protects him so that he can conduct this fight on his own terms and on his own timing. So, don't blame me for 1,400 barbaric acts inside of Israel. Don't blame me for the fact that Hamas is continuing to hold hostage United States citizens. Look over there at this other guy. Meanwhile, launching rockets into northern Israel from time to time. So we should ignore Nasrallah's statements other than what he expresses his intent. He wants Israel to be wiped off the face of the earth, just as he always has. He has 150,000 rockets. A significant number of them are precision-guided munitions with real pinpoint capabilities that can strike throughout a good part of Israel. He is an enormous threat, and each of them funded, trained, directed, emboldened by the IRGC, the Iranian terror forces, external terror forces. We should expect this to get more difficult before it gets easier. And the more that the United States demands Israel stand back, the more Hezbollah will feel emboldened, the more Iran will feel emboldened, because they'll think we are weak and unprepared to fight through to achieve our ultimate objective, which is protect humanity and freedom-loving peoples around the world from terrorist threats from these radical Islamists.
We have some of the sound, and of course, this dubbed over in English from Nasrallah. It's also important, I want to point out that he's also said another soundbite, not about Israel, but the United States must pay a price. We talked about the increased threat of terrorism here in the United States, but let's listen to Nasrallah here in the translation. Take a listen.
This glorious, blessed, large-scale operation was 100% Palestinian in terms of decision and execution. 100% Palestinian. Even the Palestinians have kept it secret.
So there you have his denial, Mr. Secretary.
Well, they were all gathered in Beirut. They've all been gathered in Moscow. They've all been gathered, and every one of them is connected to Ismail Qani, the leader of the IRGC, in deep and important ways. Don't forget where Qasem Soleimani was before we struck him. He had traveled from Beirut to Damascus, then on to Baghdad. This is an Iranian connectivity. It is a web of terror. And Nasrallah's denials notwithstanding, make no mistake about it, they are going to continue to support Hamas's effort because they are co-conspirators in their desire to attack not only Israel, but the United States of America. And Jay, you know this too. We talked a little bit about this yesterday. The risk of an attack in the homeland is very real. For a long time, they plotted this attack that took place on October 7th. Who knows how long someone who's snuck across our border, and you don't even have to sneak that much, someone who's entered our country in these last 2 years has been planning, how long they've been preparing. You can imagine them having munitions to take synagogues out. You can imagine them doing what they did to try and kill the former Saudi ambassador in Washington, D.C. No, these are terrorists who will stop at nothing. And if they are being attacked inside of Gaza in a way that they feel like puts them on the back foot, we should not for a moment think that we know precisely what they're doing here. I hope Director Wray has got his hands on it, but it's a very difficult problem set when you have hundreds of thousands of unknowns coming into our country that have been coming in for months and months and months.
Mike, we're in our Faith and Freedom Drive at the ACLJ this month because November, December are big months for us. It's the matching challenge month. And what we've been trying to explain to our donors who have been very supportive, and the responses already in the first few days has been incredible, is that we are taking a multi-prong approach. Obviously, with your analysis and your expertise, coupled with our lawyers that are litigating the FOIA to get the information. But next week, our government affairs team working directly with hostage families. That is how you have to multi-track these kind of situations to get any kind of possible resolution. And it's going to be hard to get a positive resolution for these families. We know that, but we have to try.
No, that's right. And the ACLJ has historically done as good a work as anybody in America, and you are to be lauded for it. I am confident you'll do the same for these families as well. I'm hoping to join you next week here in Washington to see some of them. There is a lot of work to do. It will take resources. It'll take really good lawyering. It'll take persistent efforts to tell our government why it is it has a responsibility. But if we get this right, if the ACLJ has the resources to do that, I pray that they can deliver a better outcome than would have happened, but for the good work of the ACLJ. Thank you for doing that.
Thank you for being part of the team, Mr. Secretary. We appreciate it so much. This tells you, folks.
Yeah, it's why this part of our Faith and Freedom Drive is so important right now. The work that we are doing on a multi-level basis, not just in the defense of Israel, the defense of the United States, but also how to utilize U.S. the resources of the ACLJ to help those in need, those hostages in being held by Hamas and those families, utilizing, and we'll get into it even more next week, utilizing our government affairs team in Washington, D.C., working across the aisles of Washington and across partisan politics to do what's right for human beings who were taken kidnapped. And it didn't, no one from Hamas asked them when they kidnapped them and took them hostage, are you a conservative or are you a liberal? Are you really a religious Jew or are you kind of a secular Jew? They just took them. They didn't care. And they're keeping them as hostages. We've got to get them out. We want you to join our Faith and Freedom Drive. Go to aclj.org today.